Well, I see a lot of friendly and familiar faces, so it's good to be back, and thank you so much for the invitation. And Scott, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to do my best to be as brief as possible and then answer questions that you have, and I know there's some other candidates in the room, many who are going to be on the ballot on August 14th, which means that they have only a few weeks to go before Election Day. I, as Scott mentioned, I'm the Republican nominee for Congressional District 22, and so we're focused all of our time and energy for November 6th. And so if you live in District 22, like many of you do, I know Marty's in Plantation and some others as well. We're excited. We're walking doors on the weekend. We're starting to build our grassroots organization. I think Marty knows we were just in the Plantation Parade a few weeks ago. We had the opportunity, my wife and I actually walked the 2.5-mile parade and got to shake a lot of hands and meet a lot of people. And so I'll spend a little bit of time. Some of you may know a little bit about my service in the legislature. It was mentioned I was the majority leader. Actually, when Marco Rubio was the Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives, he was the #1 guy in the House. I was the majority leader in the Florida House of Representatives. I was his #2 guy in the House. So many of you know at that time we were fighting for a conservative agenda for Florida, and I think a lot of people knew me in that area of South Palm Beach and northern Broward County. And the district that I'm now currently running for, this newly configured 22nd Congressional District, which runs the coastal communities from Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, all the way down to 595, and then it goes out west to Plantation. 95% of the state legislative district that I represented for those 8 years is contained inside this congressional district. Makes up about 20% of the congressional district. And while Scott mentioned that the voter registration does skew and lean a little bit more to the Democrat side now than it did when Alan West represented many of those similar neighborhoods, I have a long history of winning in a tough seat and winning tough elections. As a matter of fact, in 2008, in the same district that I ran in, Barack Obama got 52% of the vote, and I got 60% of the vote. That means a lot of people went to the polls, voted for Barack Obama, and then turned around and voted down ballot for me for state representative. And we know that we are able to attract independent voters and even a lot of Democrats over to our side without having to compromise on our principles and compromise on what we believe in. And so I think we've demonstrated that consistently, and that's the type of campaign that we're running between now and November. And so to kind of just pick up a little bit where you left off, it made me think of something. Anytime you hear somebody cite a report about healthcare in America and tell you that America ranks 37th in the world in healthcare outcomes, remember two things. One is that report was written by the United Nations. And number two, ask them to name 5 of those 37 countries where they would rather go in order to get their health care than here in the United States. I concur. We definitely have healthcare delivery problems. We have access problems. We have affordability problems. We don't have a problem with healthcare in America. We have the best quality healthcare, I believe, in the world. And I think many of the challenges we can overcome and do them in a way that doesn't rely more on government, but that relies more on free markets. And it really brings me to the point of telling you a little bit more about my race, because some of you down here I know live in the congressional district that's currently represented by Davie Schultz. Now, what many of you don't know about the race that I'm currently running in for District 22 is that there are 2 Democrats running. One is Kristen Jacobs. Some of you may know her as the county commissioner, vice mayor of Broward County. The other woman who is running is the former mayor of West Palm Beach. Her name's Lois Frankel. Now, some of you may have heard her name. What some of you may not know about Lois Frankel is that Lois Frankel was Davie Schultz's mentor when they served together in the Florida House of Representatives. So for those of you who know Davie, I think it's very easy to understand what type of Democrat Lois is. And case in point on healthcare, just recently, I believe that there are better solutions. I think you and many of us in this room believe there's better solutions to address issues like portability or pre-existing illnesses, or how about creating jobs so that those who are under 26 don't need to be on their parents' health insurance plan. And those are just some of the key issues. But Lois Frankel was asked just recently, and it goes to your point of, they just look at the recent healthcare law not as a stopping place. They look at it as really just one more point along the way toward reaching a nationalized, government-run healthcare system. And Lois Frankel, when she was mayor of West Palm Beach, came out publicly and said that's what she supports. And so it's really no surprise when you look at the race and compare Adam Hasner to Lois Frankel. I think you're going to see very clear choices, very stark contrast between what my vision is, what my views are, and what she believes. And certainly I would say that Lois Frankel and Kristen Jacobs, in terms of their views, are just opposite sides of the same coin in terms of believing in more government, believing in more spending, believing in more regulations, the types of things right now that are, I think, keeping our economy certainly growing at an unacceptable rate right now, an anemic level of growth. And so I think that as you watch this race unfold over the next few months, this is going to be one of the top 25 battleground seats in the country. Scott mentioned earlier about being able to pick up a seat here or pick up a seat there. Remember that with redistricting, Florida picked up 2 seats, but there were a lot of other states that actually lost congressional seats. And in some of those states, places like Illinois and others, those seats that they're losing are most likely going to be Republican seats. So in order to hold on to the majority in the House, it's very important that we have opportunities for pickups. And I'm proud to tell you that today, our campaign was rated as what is now called Young Guns, which is part of the National Republican Campaign Committee, to be able to target as one of the top races in the country where, quite frankly, something that Republicans don't do well on, but be on offense, where we can actually go and pick up a seat. And this is a district with 27% registered independent voters. And yes, in 2008, it voted for Barack Obama. But in 2010, the 22nd Congressional District turned around and voted all Republicans for our cabinet officials, Jeff Atwater, Pam Bondi, Adam Putnam. So these are voters that in 2008 were looking for what President Obama was selling at the time: hope and change and bipartisanship and post-partisanship. And they realized that after 2 years of Democrat majority in Washington, that they had had enough, and they elected, they turned around and voted Republican. And so we realized that this is going to be an election where we're going to be fighting for a lot of those independent-minded voters, people who don't necessarily think about party line or party affiliation. And I find that to be true. When I travel the district up and down from north to south and out to Plantation, and I have the opportunity to speak to people, everyone that I talk to has something very much in common regardless of their registration. And that's this: they want to make sure that their kids and their grandkids have better opportunities than they had. They want to make sure that their kids have more opportunity to achieve their goals, to far exceed the goals that we set for them and that they set for themselves. And they realize now that the future is not necessarily going to be that for future generations, and they're concerned. And so they're not looking left or right, they're looking for who has the best ideas and the best solutions. And I think it goes again to what you said earlier, which is very simply the fact that for Republicans right now, it's not simply enough for us to just look at the other side and say, what you're doing is wrong, vote for us. I think we are at a point in our nation's history, I believe it's a tipping point. I believe there's a lot of reasons why you can look at 2012 as how it's going to dictate not just the next few years, but really the next few generations here in this country. And when you think about the fact that you have nearly 50% of Americans not paying taxes, when you have nearly 50 million Americans on entitlement programs, on food stamps, you realize that we're reaching that point. And we need to be able to say, look, this is what we believe in, this is what the other side believes in. For what is best for you, what's best for your family, what's best for getting our economy strong again, what's best for making our country strong again on the global stage, look and see who has the better ideas. Look and see who has the better policy prescriptions. And I think when you lay those out up and down the ballot, I think people who are those independent-minded voters are going to be attracted to our message. They're going to be attracted to the things that we're out there talking about from the top of the ticket all the way down. So it really comes down to, are we ready to work? Are we willing to go out and not just talk about what we believe in, but are we willing to go out and work for what we believe in? And yes, it's the middle of summer, and yes, the campaign season hasn't really heated up yet, and there's a nice crowd here tonight, but we need to double the size of this room in the next few months. We need to triple it. We need to quadruple it. And it doesn't just mean coming to Republican Club meetings. It's everywhere that you're going to be over the next few months, whether it's at work, whether it's at church or synagogue, whether it's within your community, whether it's when you're shopping at Publix or Winn-Dixie. You need to be active and vocal, because I know, like you, I don't want to wake up on November 7th and say, wow, there was something else we could have done. We could have knocked on a few more doors. We could have made a few more phone calls. I could have sent a few more emails. This is that time, and I would tell you that when you look back at American history and look at it and study it, and I've had the opportunity to really spend a lot of time thinking about this. When you look back at every single time America has been challenged, we've had generations that have risen to the call. We've had people that have made sacrifices. We have had people who have done tough things in order to make sure not only that America persevered, but that America continued on an upward trajectory. And I think that's really what the challenge is today. Do we have people who are willing to do the tough things, say the tough things, take the tough votes, may be able to go out there and regardless of political consequences, do what needs to be done in order to ensure that the future is better for our children and for our grandchildren. I had the opportunity today, I know Doug Harrison just walked out, but I'll share this story because two friends of mine who are Jamaican, now American citizens, came to my office, and I say this because many of you may know that Doug is of Jamaican descent. And we had a long conversation about this, but it comes from my conversations with a lot of people. And just recently, when it's July 4th and it's Independence Day, and you get to really think about how fortunate we are to live in the country that we live in. For those of us who were born here and realize that we were very fortunate to be born here, but then you think about all the people who have come to this country. And I think all the time and have the opportunity to speak to them. The people who have come here from places in Eastern Europe, former Soviet satellites, or came from the former Soviet Union, people who have come here from Cuba, people who come today from Venezuela. And we saw recently what the president said about how Venezuela hasn't been, or how Chavez hasn't really been a threat, and not really understanding what is taking place down there in the axis with Iran and the axis with Cuba and elsewhere. But when you think about the people who fled oppression, you think about the people who fled dictatorships and communism and came to America because they wanted to pursue what's only possible here in this country, religious freedom, economic opportunity, you realize that those individuals are the ones who are the most concerned about the future direction of America. And why is that? It's because they say, I've seen how this turns out. I understand what happens when government takes over. I understand what happens when people lose their individual freedoms and choices because of the size and scope and intrusiveness of government. And they're concerned that this is now the direction that we're on. And they're the ones who have seen how the end of the movie turns out, for lack of a better expression. And so I'm reminded of those individuals every single day. And it makes me think back, too, to why I'm a Republican. And many of you heard in the introduction that I'm the son of two Jewish Democrats, both who were public school teachers and had $31 to their name when I was born, and moved to Florida when I was in my formative years at 6 and 7 years old. People ask me all the time, how is it possible that you could have become a Republican knowing the background that you grew up in? And I remind them, I came of age when it was morning in America. I came of age when there was that optimism about the future of this country. And really there was that belief then, like today, when there was that can-do spirit, when there was that belief that America was safer when America was stronger, when there was a moral clarity that I don't think exists at the same level today as it did back then. And we have challenges. But one thing I also know from looking back over the past few hundred years is that the challenges we have faced in prior times, I think in many ways were more difficult than the ones that we face today. This is, quite frankly, really a very predictable and also a very solvable crisis, because the crisis that we face today isn't really as much about ideology as it is about math. And when you think about it, when you're talking to some of your friends who may just be some of those voters somewhere in the middle, independents or maybe some Democrats who haven't changed their registration, and you remind them that we can't continue on this path of trillion-dollar-a-year deficits. We can't sustain $15, $16 trillion national debt that is now almost the size of our nation's entire economy, and what that's doing in terms of stifling economic growth and jeopardizing our sovereignty, and really, I believe, becoming one of our greatest national security threats in and of itself. And you realize the fact that we have got to rein in these programs like Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and other entitlements. But anytime a Democrat is out there telling you that it's the Republicans who want to end Medicare as we know it, we've seen those commercials of somebody pushing Granny off of a cliff. Remember this: the Medicare trustees, the bipartisan Medicare trustees came out and said Medicare Part A is going to go insolvent within the next 2 decades if we do nothing. Now, the healthcare law that was passed, we all know, takes $500 billion from Medicare over the next decade, so it's only going to speed up the insolvency of that program. But the reality is that doing nothing is the surest way to ensure that Medicare is going to go insolvent. So when you hear people like Paul Ryan and others talking about saving and strengthening Medicare, what we're talking about is making sure that we preserve it, and for the people who are currently on it and those who are nearing eligibility, and then we modernize it for future generations. I know this: my mom is now on Medicare and is eligible for Social Security. I'm not going to do anything that's going to jeopardize my mom's Medicare and Social Security. But I know too that whenever I talk to young Republicans, or got these 2 young gentlemen sitting in the room, do you 2 guys believe that Medicare or Social Security is going to be there for you when you become age eligible?
Probably not. I'm in my own state.
Not a single hand goes up. They don't believe in it. So we need to have the courage to make those changes, to make sure that some of those safety net programs are there for those who need it, and those who are eligible for it. And so I think that the reality, as you start to look over the course of the next 4 months, is just realizing that we can't go in the same direction that we're going in. And remember this, and I say this everywhere I go, and it's maybe not popular in the Republican club, but the Republicans are just as much to blame as the Democrats for the challenges that we're in today. Under the Bush administration, the Republicans in Washington ran up nearly $5 trillion in debt, and now in the past 3.5 years, we've run up nearly another $5 trillion in debt. And so both parties share in that fault. So this isn't about pointing fingers and placing blame and saying whose fault it is and telling people that if we just elect Republicans, that we're going to be better off. The fact of the matter is, this isn't a rear-view mirror election. This is about who has the best vision going forward, who has the best pathway for America to get back on the move again. And when you think back, and it was one of those questions that I think still rings true in our ears about Ronald Reagan. And he talked about, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? I think the question that people are asking today is, where do we want America to be 5 years from now? Where do we want America to be a generation from now? And I think that's really why each and every one of you are engaged. It's why each and every one of you are here tonight. It's why you're helping and supporting candidates. It's why you're out there doing the grassroots effort. We know this as candidates. We can't do this alone. We need your help. Richard DiNapoli, who just walked in, the chairman of Broward Republican Party, we know Broward has to do its role in making sure that we deliver the 29 electoral votes to Mitt Romney in part of our effort to take back the White House. And Broward County becomes a key battleground for that. And so we need to work harder. We need to work smarter down here. So over the next 120 days, when you're tired, when you think that you just can't keep going on any longer, when you want to just sit back, and I know Saturdays in August and September and October start looking really good with college football, and Sundays with the Dolphins. I don't know how good they're going to be this year, although they did get a new quarterback. But I know there's going to be a lot of other things that you're going to be able to have to choose in order to have us spend your time. I would ask you, over the next 4 months, put every ounce of energy you have into a candidate that you believe in, into a candidate that you support. I hope that many of you will come and volunteer on our campaign. You can go to our website. You can sign up on one of our sign-in sheets that we have here tonight. We'll leave some of that stuff with you if that's okay for future meetings. Contact us, email us, tell us about events. I know Marty's hosting a little get-together at his house in Plantation to help us build our network down here, so we're very appreciative of that. But like I said, if you believe, like I do, that this is a tipping point election, then the next almost 120 days, less than 120 days now, we need your effort. We need you to work hard. And I think that if we do, more importantly, if we do send those people, and I hope to be included in that crop, but if we do send those reinforcements to Washington, if we do send people to Washington who understand the challenges and who are unafraid of political consequences, then I think we can put America back on the right track. And so I think every day as I go out and have this conversation, I meet more and more people, people who have never been involved in the political process, who are getting engaged, who see what we see in this room. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us now to do the things that need to be done in order to put our country back on the right track. So I'll take any questions you have, but thank you guys very much for the opportunity.
What do you think our energy policy should be?
Sure. Well, I support, and even during my time in the state legislature, support expanded exploration for oil and natural gas domestically. That means the new technologies for shale oil that we're starting to see revolutionize the industry throughout the Midwest and in other parts of the country that I think can help make us much more energy secure, which is good for our economy. It's also really good for our national security. But I'm a big believer in other energy sources like nuclear power, as well as cost-effective renewable technologies. And so I think that it really can and truly be an all of the above national energy policy. But the fact of the matter is that we haven't had people with the courage in Washington to be able to say, we are going to rely on all of the resources that we have here in our own country in order to power our electric grid and power our transportation sector. And so I think it is extremely important. And like I said, I don't have, from a security perspective, I believe that we should not be sending hundreds of billions of dollars a year for sources of energy to countries that don't share our interests. So I think it is more than just a job creation solution, it's also a security solution. Yes, sir.
Raising the debt limit versus a balanced budget.
Sure. Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. What I would tell you is this, though. I think when people talk about just raising the debt ceiling itself, I think when you look back year over year over year, that raising the debt ceiling hasn't really been what the issue is. I'd like to actually refocus that conversation around a new limit. The limit that I would like to set would be to not be able to go over 100% of debt to GDP, which I think would give you a different paradigm to look at the way our debt actually is accumulated. Because right now, that's just the debt that we're paying back on money we've already borrowed. I think the reality is, though, is that the debt has gotten so big, the economy has grown at such a slow pace that now the debt is threatening to overtake the size of GDP. That's really the indicator, and I'm sure you're aware that many economists say that's when it begins to have very negative effects on our ability to borrow, on our ability to grow our economy, and it forces out private sector borrowing. So I think from that perspective, I'd like to really see us refocus that effort. The second part of your question is I believe in a real balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It's going to take more than just winning this election, though, because you need to have 2/3 in the House, 2/3 in the Senate. Then you need to get 3/4 of states. So it is a major hurdle, but I think we need to keep fighting for it. And I also think that in the interim, we can put into place spending caps and other measures to make sure that we can get spending under control. And the only way to get spending under control is if you attack what is now over 50% of the entire federal budget, and that is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt. Obviously, military spending is a large part once you go beyond that as well. But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Sure.
You emphasize the importance of sustaining America as the land of opportunity, and I think that we can both agree that that largely relies upon education. And you know, given the unintended consequences of No Child Left Behind, what plan would you have to improve the education system in America, and especially in South Florida?
Well, I think, and I think many of us would agree, it's not just K through 12, but it's also higher education. And we do, I think, still have one of the best higher education systems, if not the best higher education system in the world, be able to attract the best and the brightest and produce the talent that's necessary. I think I would like to see more power devolved back to the states. I know that I think the states certainly have a better grasp on how to achieve the goals and have accountability. I saw it when I was in the state legislature to be able to get the types of results. We're still a long way from where we need to be, but I certainly think things like school choice, paying for teacher performance, being able to give people more flexibility and options are critical to improving our K through 12 system. And I think as it relates to higher education, I think one of the things that we need to do is address why college education costs have skyrocketed far beyond the cost of healthcare inflation, far beyond the cost of any other inflation, and be able to address those from the root causes as opposed to just from the spending side, put more money into it because it actually has a circular effect. But being the son of two former public school teachers, I'm somebody who certainly understands the importance of making sure that children have the access to quality education. But I would tell you, it's really not, from a federal government level's perspective, I think a lot of the problems have become because there's been too much federal regulation and too many rules and intrusiveness from the federal government, as opposed to really putting more power back to the states and the locals. Eric? Sure. Sure. Well, I've been very clear on this from day one. I believe that it has to be a sequential solution. We have to be able to secure our borders. And until we do that, we can't do anything else. The fact of the matter is that this is not just an economic issue, very similar to the energy issue. When we have documented instances of terrorist training camps being set up along our southern border, we need to recognize that it's important for us to know who comes in to our country. And so securing our border has to be the beginning of any program for fixing our broken immigration system. And from there, once that's done, and once I think we've restored some confidence with the American people, then I believe Washington can begin to look at how do you address some of the other issues that are necessary in order to ensure that again, fixing a broken visa system, making sure that the people who are waiting in line for years and years can come into this country legally, making sure we know who comes in to this country legally. So I think it has to be a sequential solution, but I would make sure that we had all of the resources, man-made, physical, technological resources available for us on the border and to make sure that we knew who was coming into the country. Marty?
Adam, you were in the state legislature 8 years, and during that time, you and your colleagues were able to balance the state budget without a state income tax,
Yeah.
capital gains tax, inheritance tax, and so on and so forth, with only a consumption tax.
Yep.
How were you able to do that?
Well, Florida has had a very strong economy for many of the years that I was in the legislature. When we did hit the 2007, the peak of economic expansion in Florida, and we started to see some downturns in revenues coming into the state, the first thing that we did was start reducing spending. And as Scott mentioned earlier, we helped play our small part of it. I led an effort to cut our own salaries in the state legislature. It wasn't popular, but Democrats or Republicans for that matter, but it was leading by example. And I think that before we look at any types of new revenues in terms of tax increases and trying to ask people for more, I think the first thing government needs to do is live within its means. And we need to be able to, just like a family does, just like a business does, you have to balance your budget. And when you look at what's going on in Washington right now, think of this. Washington, we've been talking about a balanced budget, right? Washington hasn't even passed a budget for 3 years. Now, the Republicans in the House for the last 2 years have put a budget out there. It's been attacked. Geithner came and said, we don't know what our plan is, we just know we don't like yours. But the reality of it is that we have to be able to pass a budget in Washington. And it's why I support something very common sense. It says that if members of Congress, if Congress doesn't pass a budget, they don't get paid. It's called no budget, no pay. It's very simple. But it goes along with some of the things that I did before. I think I'm the only candidate in this race who has come out publicly in support of congressional term limits. I'm the only candidate in this race who said that they will never vote for a pay increase for members of Congress. And I'm certainly the only candidate in this race who's come out and said I will refuse a congressional pension, because that's not why we should be sending people to Washington. The people who have been there for 20 and 30 years, they might be nice men and nice women, but they've been there for far too long, and they are so out of touch with what's going on in the rest of the country and within their own communities. And so I think that's why we need a whole new crop of folks up there who aren't doing it to be part of the club. They're doing it because they recognize what a critical time this is for the country.
Well, just as a follow-up, if
Sure.
you're able to do it in the state of Florida,
Sure.
and the state of Texas can do it with just a consumption
Sure.
tax, why can't the federal?
Well, Florida doesn't just do it with a consumption tax. There's other sources of revenue.
Like what?
Fees.
Fees?
There's a lot of other sources of revenue in Florida. There's a corporate income tax in Florida as well.
What percent of the state of Florida?
I don't know the exact number. It might be somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of revenues of that it is. Listen, I understand the consumption tax movement. You and I have talked about it. I think it is something that has a lot of support out there. It's not something that at this time that I support in terms of completely overhauling our tax code to eliminate it and just go to a single consumption tax. But like I tell my friends on the left, and it reminds me of the story from Ed Koch, who came down here. Does everybody remember that in 2004, Ed Koch supported George W. Bush?
Yes.
Everybody remember that? He came down to Florida a bunch of times, and I was part of the campaign and Jewish outreach to try to get more Jewish voters over to vote for President Bush in 2004. And Ed Koch told me a story. He said that he used to tell his friends in New York that if they agreed with him 7 out of 10 times, vote for him. If they agreed with him 10 out of 10 times, see a psychiatrist. So I'll stick with on that one. Yes.
Okay, first, some good news. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, Fox News issued a new report on a poll that was taken of registered independent voters. I don't know if anybody saw it, but it was all over the 2 o'clock hour of Fox News. 60% of registered independents are dissatisfied with Obama's handling of the economy. Totally dissatisfied. Only 34% are satisfied. That's very good numbers for our side, because according to Dick Morris, history has shown that independents, especially in this kind of economy, will vote for the new guy over the incumbent. So that's some good news. My question to you is Sharia law. All across this country, judges are starting to now judge cases with Sharia law. I'm all for instituting a policy. Sharia law has no business in this country. You live in this country, you're a citizen of this country, you're a resident of this country, you abide by our laws. Is there any chance of, in Congress, a bill of any sort that Sharia law is not compatible with our Constitution or our way of life?
Sandy Adams, many of you may know, Representative Adams from Orlando, sponsored that bill.
Oh, really?
Called American Laws for American Courts. Let me go back though to your other point though, because I think it's important to emphasize, and we talked about this a minute ago. Just simply relying on the fact that 60% in this case of independent voters don't support President Obama or are upset with President Obama's leadership is only half of the equation. It's not enough. And I think it's why we need to be so vigilant from our side as to talking about what our beliefs are, what our views are, what our policies would be, what we would do differently. Certainly what we would do differently from the Obama administration, but I think just as importantly, what we would do differently from the last time the Republicans were in the White House, and what we would do differently from the last time that Republicans controlled both houses of Congress. So I think it's
focusing more on independence than preaching to the choir.
It's not necessarily that. I think elections are won by motivating different groups of the electorate. Some is motivating your base. Some is bringing over swing voters and independent voters, and there are a lot of those in this area. And so, as we were talking earlier, two groups of people may hear the same words and think that they're hearing different things. And so it's not about changing our message. It's about making sure that I think that we're laying out our agenda and attracting people to our side, getting them to understand why having the types of policies that we were talking about, reforming the tax code, making it flatter, fairer, and simpler, repealing job-killing regulations, being able to have a domestic energy policy, having free market, patient-centered reforms for health care, why those are better in terms of how it's going to make that person's life better. It's going to help them get a job. It's going to help them save and invest. It might help them start their own business. It's going to help them get their kids into college. It's going to help them be able to retire the way that they want to retire. So if we can communicate our message in that way, then I think we're going to be very successful on November 6th. If we as a party and we as candidates sit and point fingers and place blame and say, hey, the other guy's doing a terrible job, vote for me, I'm not sure those independent voters are going to be attracted to that message. And I think that here in Florida, and probably in a lot of other states, when you're looking at the presidential electoral college map, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Colorado, those are states where independent voters are going to, in many ways, determine who's the occupant of the White House in January of 2013. So I think it's very important for us to have a proactive message. Maybe one or two more questions.
How are you, if you are, reaching out to, say, Democrats who are feeling disenfranchised and not happy with the way things are going? How are you reaching out to them, and are you reaching?
We are. As a matter of fact, a large part of our grassroots effort is going beyond just talking to the Republicans that live in District 22, talking to independents, talking to a lot of Democrats, particularly a lot in the Jewish community. Those who I know, those who know me, Like I said earlier, I got 60% of the vote. I was very honored to get 60% of the vote in the same year that Barack Obama got 52% in the same district that I ran in. Well, I think the going out and the tactics necessarily aren't any different, which are knocking on doors, making phone calls. We're going to have all the different ways to communicate with them in the next couple of months. It's one of the reasons why every campaign needs to effectively raise financial resources so that they can get their message out. And then it goes back to what I said. It's not about changing your message for that group. I don't go into a group filled of voters who may not share my political affiliation and tell them something completely different. I don't change my views on an issue, but it's about explaining why those solutions are better. And I think people are open.
I hope you're sharing your tactics or your
Well,
message on how you're communicating and how you did it in.
Yeah, I do. I will say this. I do think that what I just talked about is very important. The idea of an alternative policy, the idea of alternative solutions is, I believe, the first step. Because I don't think a voter is willing to even listen unless you're willing to say what you would actually do instead. And so when you talk, my wife, many of you know Jillian, my wife has epilepsy. And we're concerned, just like many of you probably have your own personal story, family story. What happens if you lose your health insurance? So we have to deal with the issue of a pre-existing illness, the issue of portability. If you lose your job, can you take your insurance to your next place of employment? Today, you can't. You lose your insurance when you lose your job. Today, if you have a pre-existing illness, in many instances, some of those issues were addressed back in 1996, but not all of them. You can lose your health care coverage. So what are we going to do that's better? And can we address those concerns better than a one-size-fits-all, essentially, government-run program? And I think we can. And I think we need to do a better job explaining to people. We're not saying go back to the time of when insurance companies were denying care. That's what you're going to hear from the left. You're going to hear all of this vitriol. I know this already. My opponent, or my likely Democrat opponent, has already started to call me an Allen West clone, has already started to call me a right-wing extremist. That's what they know. They know how to vilify and attack. And I think if we can do it in a very straightforward way, talk about ideas, talk about solutions, and talk about how do you make that person's life better, I think we're going to win. Maybe one last question.
I'll follow up along
All right.
the lines, if you don't mind, tagging back on the energy point. And
I
you
think I'm
say
stalling for Janine here.
We've really become, I mean, we deserve the label party of no, because it's really all we've done is say, so Barack Obama's the president, no, we're not going to do that, no, we don't want to, but we don't offer, we don't turn around and say, here's a better way, here's an actual plan. Go back to the energy, 73, the energy crisis, and OPEC cut us off and basically shut our whole country down. Nixon came out with Kissinger, we're going to have an energy plan. And every president since then has said that, and not one has ever done anything, and actually laid out a plan. And this is not a partisan issue, it's because both parties have done nothing. There's only one plan, actual detailed plan, that takes us in steps of energy independence, which is the Pickett's plan. I don't know how familiar you may or may not be with it. It's changed a lot over 4 years since it first came out, but it's the actual only plan that attempts to achieve that goal. Are you familiar with it? So
I'm aware of it. Natural gas is a major component, I think, of America's energy future for powering the electric grid, but also for transportation fuel, particularly as it relates to large truck transportation, buses, 18-wheelers, other heavy transportation. So I see a future in CNG that I think will be very significant for this country. And I think, again, the idea of government picking winners and losers is not something that I believe in. I would like to see government, as we were talking about, get out of the way and let the market really dictate which energy sources are going to be able to most effectively and most cost effectively and most efficiently power our country. Any manufacturer, any business will tell you that beyond facility and employment and payroll, energy becomes one of their biggest line item costs. If we keep driving up the cost of energy, that's enough taxes, energy, regulations. Those are the things that drive jobs out of this country because they're no longer competitive here. And so I think when we're forming our policies, I think everything we do has to be viewed through the lens of how do you create an environment for private sector job creation. And I think that really becomes the mantra, I think, for Republicans. Tax code, regulatory code, energy policy, healthcare policy, spending, entitlement reform. All of these things together will, I believe, create an environment that will make America more competitive. And the quickest way to fix Social Security and Medicare right away is get our economy going again, because many of those programs, as you know, are funded from payroll taxes. So when people aren't working, then those programs are being funded at an even less clip than what are needed to even just try to keep level. Last question. Yes, sir.
I'm concerned, my biggest concern is national security.
Sure.
And the provocations from Iran, and how do you feel about all that? And the Arab Spring, which I think will quickly be an American winter. These are things that keep me awake at night.
They should. They certainly keep me awake. What we saw in Egypt most recently with the election of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Muslim Brotherhood president, what we're seeing in some of the other countries there right now as well in terms of those Islamist movements. I think they are a threat not just for stability in that region. Not only are they endangering, I think, our greatest ally, the state of Israel, but I think it is very disruptive for America, certainly from an energy perspective, but also elsewhere. When Iran is aligning itself with Chavez in Venezuela, Iran is aligning itself in our hemisphere, I think we have some very big problems. This president, I believe, has advanced a national security policy which has abandoned our allies, not just Israel, but you've seen it in places like Poland and elsewhere, where this president, I think, has really sent the message to the rest of the world that you're better off being antagonistic to America and get more attention than you are actually being an ally of America. And so I believe in a very simple national security policy, most recently articulated by Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. And I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country right now is that we need to understand that the world is a better place when America is the strongest country on the face of the earth. We need to understand that we're not perfect, but more importantly, that we are certainly the right moral compass when it comes to these issues of freedom of speech, of women's rights. When you look back to the issue that was mentioned earlier, and the fact and how in so many of these countries women are treated as second-class citizens, there are real challenges that I hope that we have the right leadership in the White House, and certainly I know as a member of Congress that I will ensure that America has the resources necessary in order to protect our own security interests here in our homeland, but also where appropriate and when appropriate on foreign soil as well. Because I will tell you, the threats that we face, and we've seen it, aren't just in hot spots around the world. We face threats here from within. And I think it is very important for us to recognize why, I'll say it this way, you can't fight an enemy unless you're willing to admit that an enemy even exists. And there is certainly, like there has been in prior generations, there is an ideology out there that certainly seeks the destruction of the West. And I think we need to be very cognizant of it, and I think we need to have a very open conversation. One of my greatest heroes in all history is Winston Churchill. And the reason why is because Churchill was one of the few lone voices in the 1930s against popular culture, against political correctness, warning of the threat that Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany posed to the rest of the world. And we need leaders like that. We need people who are going to be willing to stand up and say, there's a problem out there and it needs to be addressed. And so I think from a national security perspective, I would close with this, and I've mentioned it briefly earlier, is that our fiscal challenges that we face are directly tied to our national security. And the more that we allow our deficits and our debt to balloon, the less ability we are going to have to respond to those instances when needed. And more importantly, the larger our debt gets and the more we start to borrow, particularly from countries that don't share our values and our interests, it's no different than when you have to borrow from a bank or borrow from one of your friends and they start dictating the terms to you. That's the jeopardy that I think we face if we continue down this fiscal path. It is not only going to have a detrimental effect on our economy, but it will also, I think, have a debilitating effect on America's standing in the world. And so I think those two issues go hand in hand. So, Chairman?
I just wanted to personally congratulate
Gotta give the
you.
chairman the floor.
No. It's just to congratulate you for being named, achieving the Young Gun status.
Thank you.
I know a lot of people might not know all the details about that, but it's a testament to his organizational skills, his fundraising prowess, and his campaign messaging and everything about it. Now, this is a district that the Democrats are salivating, trying to take back. And we got to get behind Adam Hasner because he is a great candidate, and he is the one that can win this seat and can make it happen, and that all those things that you have in your hearts that you're concerned about, he can represent us in Washington. And so it's very important to get behind him, whatever you can do. Fundraising, volunteering, anything you can do.